Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who is the advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your window. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. Well, it is clear that, more than ever today that the clock on Israel's war against Hamas is ticking. The diplomatic clock, the thing that people were talking about from the beginning of the war, has been running out for a while, but really the one that matters is the one that coming from the White House. And it's clear more than ever that while President Trump hasn't said to Prime Minister Netanyahu to stop the war, it's clear that he now has limited patience. Some of the comments that's been coming out from him, even if you can see that sometimes President Trump speaks off the cuff, there's certainly been enough messages to show that there is limited patience. He does want this war over. There's a lot of things going on that necessitate the end of the war. And in the next, I don't know, at some point today, there's going to be from what I understand, President Trump is going to release the day after plan, which again is another sign that they're already thinking about the end of the war. It's putting pressure both on Hamas to show that there is going to be an alternative to Hamas. We don't know yet what's in this plan, but also to put pressure on Israel to say, hurry up, there is a plan now. Do what you have to do, but do it quickly. More and more people are saying that this war will be over by the end of the year. Obviously not the Jewish New Year, because that starts in a few weeks, but by the end of the calendar year. But what is also true is that there doesn't seem yet to be too much urgency on the ground. And what I mean by that is it's clear also that Prime Minister Netanyahu and other members of the cabinet are losing patience with the IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir. This has been going on for a while, but basically for the last few weeks, there has been this plan to conquer Gaza City. It was passed through the cabinet. The IDF basically brought out the actual operation itself, and that was passed through. Everything is ready, but it's going to take time. Some people say it will take more than 6 months. Some people say it will take a year, perhaps even longer. But what is clear is Israel probably doesn't have that much time diplomatically, especially where the White House is concerned. The conditions for even entering Gaza City on a concerted basis, yes, there have been minor operations in and around Gaza City on the environs in Zaytun, which is just south. Those have happened, but the conditions for a mass entry into Gaza City, which would be necessary for Israel to conquer it, have not been created. First of all, the call-up papers haven't officially been sent out to the tens of thousands of reservists that would be necessary for such an incursion. More importantly, arguably, is that the 1 million, roughly, Gazan residents of Gaza City have not yet vacated their areas. We saw earlier in the war that the world challenged Israel that they couldn't go into Rafah because there's no way they could displace the hundreds of thousands of Gazans there at the time. To be able to do that operation, they were able to do it. They were able to move the population of Rafah elsewhere and then basically conquer the city and clear it mostly pretty much of Hamas. Here, it's a very different situation. First of all, Gaza City is much larger. It's the capital city. It's an area that mostly hasn't been touched by the IDF throughout the war. But there are several other elements. And what we understand tonight is of the around 1 million Gazan residents of Gaza City, only around 5,000 have relocated. The IDF Arabic spokesman, Avichai Adrei, who's become quite famous in the Arab world throughout the war, has said to the Gazan residents to please leave, to go south. There's humanitarian aid, there's tents, there's everything else. But it's clear that they haven't yet, the overwhelming majority haven't yet basically answered this. First of all, because there are Hamas threats. Hamas want as many people to remain in their houses as possible to make it more difficult to get those headlines of civilians being killed, etc., etc. There's fear. Hamas and others have put out that if you travel south, you will be killed. Your family will go hungry. But also there's the economic situation. Many people in Gaza are still living in their homes. And to move south, they've been told that you'll need a few $1,000s to buy a tent. And if you don't have a tent, you'll be sleeping out in the open, and people don't want to do that. So all of these conditions mean that as of now, and already the plan to evacuate is already underway, if only a tiny fraction have actually evacuated, which will make it almost at this point impossible to do a full-scale operation for obvious reasons. So the clock is ticking, but there doesn't seem to be too much urgency. Perhaps it's a lack of planning. Perhaps they underestimated, once again, Hamas. Perhaps they misunderstood and they thought that this would be just like Rafah. But at the end of the day, we're almost in September. We have only a few more months to the end of the year. Gaza City is not Rafah. It's not all these other places that Israel has conquered. This is the big one. This is the one that the Israeli public and the world have been told will end the war. That's Hamas's last holdout. But at this moment in time, already a few weeks in, we don't seem to be moving too far. On the diplomatic front, on the possible deal, again, things are not moving. It's once again the blame game. A few weeks ago, the blame was all on Hamas. Hamas didn't respond to the Witkoff deal, which Israel had agreed to. Now Hamas, realizing perhaps that Israel had moved away from it, have now accepted what some have characterized as 90% of the Witkoff deal, or what Israel agreed to. Others have characterized it as 98%. And Qatar and Egypt are now turning their blame away from Hamas onto Israel, at least publicly. And Israel, they're still waiting for Israel to respond to Hamas's response to what Israel has already accepted. Apparently, according to some of these interlocutors, it's already been a few weeks and Israel has not responded yet. It's unclear exactly why Israel hasn't responded. But what we have heard more and more from the high echelons of the Israeli government is that they're no longer interested in a partial deal. They want a full deal, all the hostages out, end of the war. But that would mean that Hamas would give up rule, they would surrender, they would give up their arms, and some would go into exile. Obviously, Hamas are not interested in this, certainly not anything close to that at this point. The Trump administration seems to, at this point, have fallen in line with Netanyahu, saying that at the moment, the Witkoff deal, the phase deal, the temporary deal, whatever you want to call it, is now no longer on the table. And that's another indication that the Trump administration and others just really want this war to end. But they are, at least at this point, allowing Israel to try and force the end of it by militarily conquering Gaza City, pushing Hamas to the negotiating table and trying to get something which will loosely resemble, at least to some aspect, of an Israel victory and a Hamas surrender. But it's clear the clock is ticking, and it's clear that Israel doesn't have too much time, and Hamas understands that. And that's why it's diplomatically, militarily, and on the civilian level, on the ground, they are trying to hold up Israel as long as possible, because as long as Israel is not able to go into Gaza City in a concerted way and conquer it and maybe destroy some of the Hamas remaining battalions there, then it just suits them very well. We did hear tonight on American media, Yechiel Leiter, ambassador of Israel to US, say that Israel hasn't completely ruled out a partial deal. I don't know if he said that off the cuff, or there is a slight opening still for a temporary deal. That certainly hasn't come from the highest levels, but the fact that the ambassador of Israel said that perhaps could raise some hopes that a partial deal could still be on the table at some level from the Israeli side. Tonight, as I said, is an all-important meeting in the White House with President Trump. There's been some interesting details of this so-called day after plan that's going to be released at some point, maybe the next few hours, maybe the next few days. Some interesting characters involved. We know that former Prime Minister Tony Blair is central to this. We know he formerly had a role as the head of the quartet, which was one of those erstwhile failed peace attempts going back a number of years. We know Jared Kushner is involved, and we also know that Prime Minister Netanyahu's right-hand man, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, is also in Washington in the White House discussing these details, whether he's part of the discussions or at least giving Israel's input into that day after plan. It's not clear yet, but I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the coming hours, or at least the coming days. On the Iran front, things are getting very, very problematic for Iran. Today or tomorrow, probably the E3, Germany, France, and the UK are going to officially register with the UN what's called snapback sanctions. If we remember the JCPOA in 2015, as part of the deal, the international community led by the UN would stop its sanctions, crippling sanctions at the time, on everything from the banking to the oil to all these very important issues, industries for Iran, that they would be basically paused as long as Iran adhered to the JCPOA, that 2015 Barack Obama broker deal. The Europeans are not happy about the direction the Iranians are taking, and as of tomorrow, there's a very strong possibility they will start the process of what's being called the snapback sanctions. They will take around a month. There's a bureaucracy involved, and there is still that window and that time for Iran to come back to the table. The Europeans have even stated that they hope the Iranians will come back to the negotiating table and negotiate or renegotiate some sort of deal before the snapback sanctions really take effect in around a month, because they will be crippling to an Iranian economy already reeling. They have lack of electricity, lack of water. The local currency is just getting out of control. So this would be an extremely, extremely difficult situation for the Iranian regime. So we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Home in Israel, it's been quite a traumatic week. Started with the Hostage Families Forum declaring a day of stoppages where they tried to shut the country down as much as possible. Various industries went on strike. There were demonstrations that closed down major arteries, highways, railway around the country. Hundreds of thousands demonstrated around the country. This isn't the first time, but it's clear that things are getting more popular from their point of view. More and more people are taking to the street, and the activities that they're taking, not just in the public arena, but also against members of the government, are certainly ratcheting it up. One of the big issues in Israel, again, surrounds the whole enlistment issue. We've talked about that many times in recent weeks, the non-enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox community. Well, now the tempers have been raised once again, because as tens of thousands of call-up papers will be sent to the majority of the Israeli public, or at least sectors from the majoritarian public in Israel, to enlist, to go back to reserves, to fight in Gaza, to try and conquer Gaza City, etc. There are tens of thousands of Israelis, mostly from the ultra-Orthodox community, who are looking to go on this pilgrimage, which has become more and more popular over the last few years, to go to the grave of Rabbi Nachman, the Breslov Rebbe in Uman in the Ukraine. It's become a very popular pilgrimage, and not only are tens of thousands potentially going to Uman, but now the ultra-Orthodox parties asked for the funding of these trips from the government. They've asked for 10 million shekels at least, I believe it is, and it's coming from various ministries. Let's not forget, this is at a time of austerity where many ministries are being asked to cut back, where soldiers don't have enough equipment, where education systems don't have enough money, etc., etc. But they seem to have found 10 million shekels specifically to allow tens of thousands of mostly ultra-Orthodox Israelis to go. But the bigger outrage is, at the moment, one of the areas of most of contention with the ultra-Orthodox community are these sanctions on members of the ultra-Orthodox community who receive enlistment papers but do not enlist in the army. They are then considered AWOL, and there are various measures taken against them, one of which they are not allowed to travel abroad. But Aryeh Deri, the leader of the Shas party, has called for, and apparently was even given a guarantee that none of these deserters, they're considered official deserters, will be arrested at the airport and they will be allowed to travel to Oman. So you can imagine the anger amongst all other sectors of Israeli society as their brothers, fathers, sons, friends are going off to war, while tens of thousands are basically going off somewhere on a vacation at the expense of the government, while the government decides to completely leave the law aside and ensure that none of the people who are supposed to be arrested will do so. As one can imagine, this has really caused a lot of anger in Israeli society, and this is what's been taking up a lot of media attention over the last few days. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these issues.
All right. Many thanks, Ashley. I will begin with a question here from JL, who asks, is anyone taking these constantly changing deals promoted by the U.S. seriously anymore? Every one of them has come to nothing.
Yes, they are taken very seriously because the US is really the power broker. Obviously, there are other, interlocutors involved, whether it's Qatar, Egypt, or others, but the US is certainly the strong man in the room. And what they say certainly has value. They put pressure on some of the others to accept their principles. The Witkoff deal was taken very seriously. It was debated by all sides. But it needs both sides to come to the table. At one point, Israel was there, Hamas wasn't, and now Hamas are claiming that it's there and Israel isn't. But still, the deal probably, at the end of the day, the deal will be brokered. Whether it's officially brokered in Doha, Cairo, or whatever, it will be with an extremely strong presence and input from Washington, D.C. So it still matters where the U.S. stands on this and what the US does on this. So yes, I would say that these things are taken seriously, but at the moment there doesn't seem to be a permanent deal because Israel's, what Israel would need is far, far greater than anything that Hamas could agree to at this point. And that is why Netanyahu feels that more military pressure, especially conquering Gaza City, will hopefully bring Hamas back to the table for some sort of a deal.
All right, thank you. I'm going now to, not quite a question, a remark, and maybe you can offer your comments on it. It comes from Rochelle Mand, who asks, or states, President Trump can solve this whole thing by talking tough with Qatar and make them order Hamas to release the hostages. Can you comment on that?
That's a case that a lot of people have been making. It's certainly not one that the Israeli government is making publicly. One can make of that what they will. But yes, Qatar and Turkey. Let's not forget, some of Hamas senior members are also in Turkey. And if more pressure was put on not just Qatar, but also Erdogan, perhaps Hamas could become more amenable to a deal. But at the end of the day, probably the deal has to be accepted by Hamas in the Strip, in the Gaza Strip. The political leadership, whether it's in Qatar or Turkey, has some influence, but it's been argued that it's relatively limited. And it's really the power brokers, the leaders, whoever they are today, because Israel's taken out quite a lot of them over the last 2 years, in the Strip are the ones who have to make the deal. They have to agree to it. They're the ones who hold the hostages. They're the ones on the ground fighting. They're the ones who hold the territory. They're the ones who have to be disarmed. They're the ones who perhaps some of them have to go into exile. So yes, I've no doubt that there could and should be more pressure on Qatar and Turkey and others. But at the end of the day, really where it matters is pressure on Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Carrie Hillebrand asks, is it conceivable that the plan to conquer Gaza City is largely a bluff on Prime Minister Netanyahu's part?
I don't think it's a bluff, but I've said this many times over the last few weeks. I do believe that Netanyahu wants a deal. He would prefer not to have to go into Gaza City. I think he's feeling the pressure, the international pressure. He's feeling pressure at home. As I said, there were around 400,000 demonstrators out this week. If you think about Israeli society, or at least, that's, if you take out the ultra-Orthodox, perhaps even parts of the Arab, that's between 5 and 10% of all Israelis. The war has certainly become less popular over the last few months. Different people have different reasons. Some, it's all about the hostages. Some feel that what's going on in Gaza is becoming too much. Some are just exhausted by it. There's a number of reasons why more and more people are feeling that the war should be ended, and that's certainly putting pressure. It's not necessarily within Netanyahu's party or in his government, but it certainly is it is starting to ebb away even there. And as I said, President Trump has made it clear that time is running out. So Netanyahu is certainly not openly bluffing. I think he would prefer a deal rather than go into Gaza with the lives that would be lost on Israel's side. The public diplomacy wins for Hamas that they've ratcheted up over the last few weeks since the hunger and famine campaign begun, and that would just get worse and worse. So I think Netanyahu would prefer the war to end, but he cannot end it without at least meeting most of his criteria. Whether they're symbolic or real, that's a debate to be had in the future. But it doesn't seem at this point in time that Hamas are there. I'd be surprised if a deal would happen before Israel went in at all to Gaza City. I think they probably will have to go in, and then I think Hamas will probably have to make an estimation of how things are going. But at the moment, as I said, things are going well for them. The vast majority of the Gazan population has not moved from Gaza City. They haven't seen that massive military build-up to show that any operation is really just, happening in the next few days. So there's not that pressure yet, but we'll have to wait and see. But perhaps part of this is to give some space for diplomacy. But I don't think it's a bluff. But I do certainly think that Netanyahu, let's just say he would prefer a deal over having to enter and conquer Gaza City.
All right, thank you. Now, going to another question from the audience, from an anonymous attendee who asks, why has Gaza City been left untouched as a strategic matter?
Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all, because when you have a population, the whole Gaza Strip of 2 million, and around 1 million of them in Gaza City, one can imagine that it's going to be the toughest place to conquer. It's the last part of it's got the last real battalions and real Hamas sort of headquarters. But a major reason is because there's a feeling that a lot of hostages are being held there. There has been a lot of talk this week that the Israeli army hasn't gone into certain areas of the strip, specifically because they know from intelligence sources that that is where the hostages are being held. We are now, I think I heard earlier, 1 year since 6 Israeli hostages were killed as the IDF got closer to where they were, the famous murder of Hirsch, Goldberg, Polin, and 5 others. And that's weighed very heavily on Israeli society and the IDF. So there's a number of reasons why Israel hasn't gone into Gaza City, and the hostages is certainly one of them. And as I said, the fact that it's taking this long to come up with a plan to try and move the civilian population, it's the biggest city, so it's obviously going to be the hardest to conquer. So that's probably the reason why they left it to last.
All right, thank you. Now, going to a question from John Wolstetter, who asks, how long can the 20 hostages possibly still stay alive under the appalling conditions of their captivity?
I mean, it's an impossible question to answer. My feeling would be it wouldn't be in Hamas's interest to let them die, because just on a purely, calculating point of view, they're worth more to Hamas alive than dead. First of all, because obviously it resonates more with the Israeli public, and they know that Israel will pay more in whatever it is for live ones. But also Israel can more easily rescue dead hostages, because you can't, to put it mildly, you can't murder a dead hostage. If the Israeli, as has done quite a few times, even in recent months, when Israel goes on a rescue operation for a dead body, it's not like Hamas can kill them while they run away. But I think the main reason is it's just, yes, I'm not ruling it out. And even President Trump keeps on talking about less than 20, which has shocked a lot of people in Israel, because we've always been told that there are 20 live hostages. And President Trump on at least 2 occasions has spoke of less than 20. So it could be that some have died, or maybe some were always dead and they just were defined as alive, or allowed to be defined as alive, because, again, that strengthens Hamas's hand. But I don't think they'll keep them in appalling conditions. I don't think they'll let them die if possible, because, again, just purely from a calculating point of view, they're worth more to Hamas alive than dead.
Thank you. Now, segue to another question, if a bit of a morbid one. What is happening to the bodies of the dead hostages, and how is Hamas holding them?
It's a difficult question. We can only go by what we've known before. Sometimes they're stored in hospitals. Sometimes they're buried. Sometimes they're held in tunnels. That's just going by previous experience. It is a very morbid thing. I don't want to distress some of the viewers here, but there's some really disturbing stories, which, has come out, some of them openly, some of them less so, of body parts that were rescued individually over the last 2 years. But they're holding on to them. They know where they are, and they'll just, that's unfortunately, that's also part of the deal that's being spoken about. They're talking about 10, the partial deal, at least I should say at this point, the 10 live hostages and 20, although I did see the number 18. I'm not quite sure why, because to my understanding, it's supposed to be half, 20 dead bodies as the first part in this partial deal, if it ever should happen. So they clearly have the bodies. They know where they are. We've seen it before when they need to hand them back as part of a deal. They know where they are, and they do hand them back. Again, we remember that terrible story of Shiri Bibas when they gave the body of someone else that wasn't Shiri Bibas, but very quickly, within 24 hours, they gave back Shiri Bibas's body. So it's clear that they knew what was going on, and they just wanted to torment the Israeli public one more time.
All right. Many thanks, Ashley. We are unfortunately out of time for this week's podcast. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us this week.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. And for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout in your email inboxes over the weekend for our forthcoming podcast offerings email. As always, I thank you all again for joining us, for your viewership, and for your participation. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.